They need to set absolutely clear targets for what they are trying to achieve, because that is what allows all the other stakeholders, in particular the business community, to be able to align their investment decisions to that. Secondly, government needs to prioritise, because it is only government that has the authority, the accountability to be able to make the prioritisation decisions based on the affordability at that time. Thirdly, and most importantly, governments need to carry all of that through the entire departmental policy and regulatory framework in the country, so that businesses in particular have certainty about what it is that we're trying to aim for. We need that framework. Good examples of where we've seen this work: Norway with the speed of its transition to electric vehicles, China with its EV bus program, now India with its EV bus program, supported, by the way, by the Zero Emission Vehicle Emerging Markets Initiative from the US and UK governments in association with the WBCSD. Great work by the department, by the government, state government of Victoria in Australia, which for years has looked at the link between energy generation, energy grid, and the way in which that affects the speed in which we can move to a zero emission vehicle environment. Or most recently, National Infrastructure Commission in the UK in November published the second National Infrastructure Assessment. Amongst other things, it includes a whole map for the development of a hydrogen distribution spine for the UK. Government responsibility, occasionally non-government actors move in. If anybody hasn't read the net zero strategy for Australia, Net Zero Australia programme that was built off the Net Zero America programme, frankly, government could just pick that up as a blueprint for what needs to be done. Secondly, procurement. It remains an absolute scandal, in my view, that the world still builds most of its infrastructure in ways that the Romans would recognise. A really powerful report by McKinsey, published nearly 10 years ago now, said that the world was paying probably 40% more for its infrastructure than it should do. But the prize is not saving 40%, as McKinsey suggested. The prize is the fact that if you turn that equation around, we can get 66% more decarbonised assets for the money that we're prepared to put on the table today. And I reckon that means that the point at which we could achieve net zero in the world could come forward by 10 years if we embrace that efficiency. What do we need to do? We need to move the entirety of the infrastructure development into an off-site manufactured, mass customised environment. The industry will not do that of its own volition. The industry is very low margin. The industry will only act because the procurement frameworks that the big buyers of infrastructure, whether they're public or private, put in front of them. And if the incentivization is there and the long-term vision of where that opportunity lies is there, then we will see the unlocking of that sort of efficiency. And it is desperately urgent we do that now, but it is up to us as infrastructure buyers to create the conditions that makes that happen. Good examples of where we can see this happening: UK offshore wind programme, through the auction process that moved the entirety of that industry in less than 10 years from something where no private money would touch it to the position where it's entirely funded by private money. Hong Kong 2.0 programme, deliberately looking at the way in which different sectors in the Hong Kong economy can have technology brought into them. The UK new hospital programme, which is looking at a mass customisation programme to all of the new healthcare facilities in the country, having discovered that the National Health Service had 4,000 different specifications of doors. We can't afford to do this any longer. Finally, financing, the topic of this discussion. Two parts. Firstly, from a public finance point of view, from a public policy point of view, the case for investing in decarbonised assets is a complete political and public policy no-brainer. Hugely powerful piece of research published by Mark Jacobson and his team at Stanford University almost a year ago now, showed that the financial payback period only on investing in renewable energy was 5.5 years. And if a government factors in the absolute cost, the real cost, for example, that's being expended on health interventions because of the poor air quality driven by ICE vehicles in cities, that payback period, his team estimated, dropped to 0.8 years. That is the public policy case. And that is the case on which every advanced economy today should be investing a much greater proportion of its GDP in infrastructure investment today in order to get us out of the mess that we're heading into. Right, private finance piece of the equation to close with. Something really dramatic is happening as we speak, but I don't think any of us are really noticing it. On the 12th of January this year, there was the announcement by BlackRock that it was purchasing Global Infrastructure Partners. So what? Global Infrastructure Partners is arguably the most successful of a small crop of specialist boutique infrastructure investors that were created in the early 2000s. Infrastructure didn't exist as an asset class before that. But if you look at what Larry Fink said in making that acquisition, and you look at the number of copycat deals that have already happened since that announcement on the 12th of January, what you can see is the world of infrastructure finance is of its own volition moving from its adolescence into its maturity. The sums of money, the scale of the institutions that are coming into that game finally give us the firepower we need. But there is absolutely no point putting in front of BlackRock, can you invest 100 million in this project here and another 100 million in the project there? Billions of pounds, billions of dollars is what they need, and we need them to invest in. Do not do this project by project. We need to do this at the level of the infrastructure decarbonisation bond for a continent, let's say, or the Ukraine reconstruction bond, 50-year life. That's the sort of level at which we should be trying to tap into that capital and then applying it into all the infrastructure that the world needs, because that, by the way, also de-risks the investment for the private investor's point of view, which also makes it much more attractive to them. Have we ever done all of these things well? I'm not sure we have, but I cheered yesterday when my colleague Ozan, who I noticed has slipped in at the back, reported back on the conversation that happened here on Monday, convened by the World Bank, which was all around setting up a program for the electrification of vehicles in sub-Saharan Africa. And I looked at all the components of the governance that is being proposed for that, and I went, that is what we need to be doing. That is the scale at which we need to be operating. So, to finish, we have all the tools. We have all the technology. We do not need any more technology. We have the availability and the willingness of finance to come and solve this. All we need is the mindset. All we need is the leadership. All we need is the determination. All we need is the collaboration coming from both government and the private sector in order to be able to solve this existential challenge based on an understanding that the world is a very precious but very fragile place today, and we owe it to our children to do this. I leave one last thought, not just for panelists, but for everyone in this audience. The challenge is this: as you leave this room, the question is, in whatever capacity you are involved in this infrastructure challenge in the world today, what can you do that means from today, whatever you do delivers 10 times as much at 10 times the speed, because that is what the world needs to do today. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I think you've given us a masterclass in how we do not need slides for a good presentation. Thank you so much. I just was looking at the picture behind us, and I think Franny Lautier yesterday was talking about this picture, and just there's so much happening in this picture that represents what needs to happen by 2030, 2035 in order for us to meet climate goals. Electrifying public transport, building out public transport infrastructure seen here, electrifying freight seen here, building out more active mobility infrastructure for this gentleman on the bicycle. There's a minibus and a minibus, the informal transport that plies on Africa's roads so predominantly. This needs to be electrified and improved. There are motorcycles, they're on the sides, the bodas that so many people rely on to get around in African cities. There are efforts to electrify these 2- and 3-wheeled vehicles, and just improving the pedestrian infrastructure that is often underrepresented, but is the main form and the most low carbon form of transport that we can find. So how can we finance this infrastructure and scale it up to what is needed in these next few years, which is a very steep hill. Let's be honest with ourselves. This is a very steep hill, but I hope to see some bright spots here today. Sergio Aveleda, let's start with you. Why don't you introduce yourself? And I think we wanted to ask you about your experience in Sao Paulo, building out the city's metro system and bringing in some private finance for that. And I'll just remind panelists, we have 6 panelists, so if you could keep your remarks short, we'll try to get to 2 questions per panelist.
Yes, thank you very much, Benjamin. First of all, I want to thank you, WRI, this fantastic organization, and the World Bank for the invitation. It's an honor for me to be here with you and to join this discussion with these brilliant colleagues. Yes, I used to be president of the Metro in São Paulo and also president of the Suburban Trains Company and the former secretary of urban mobility in São Paulo. São Paulo has a good experience, I think, about how to engage the private capital, the state government, and the multilateral organizations to accelerate the expansion and the modernization of the metro system and suburban train system in São Paulo. We have different lines in São Paulo now, and at the end of the 90s, in a huge financial crisis in Brazil, the Metro and the São Paulo state government obtained financial support from the World Bank to hire the construction, the civil works, and the electric system and some other systems to implant the new metro line in São Paulo. After a lot of years since they started to build the metro in São Paulo, the metro restarted to build a new line. With this support, the metro was able to hire the civil works and to hire some systems. But we didn't have enough money to close the construction. We needed more money, especially to buy the trains and to hire the signaling system. In 2004, after we started the civil works, it started in 2004. At the end of 2004, the Brazilian framework, the regulation, changed a little bit, and the federal law created the private partnership, implanted the public-private partnership rules in Brazil. And we start to bid the concession of this new line. In 2006, we signed the contract, and finally now this line is fully operating with under private concession. It's going very well, the concession, the quality of service, the level of service. At the same time, in this period, the state conceded other lines. The line 5, it was a pure concession because the private sector didn't put money. They are putting money to modernize, but not to build the line. The line 8 and line 9, and another good experience is the line 6 that is building just right now using the private sector. The Acciona is actually the concessionaire of this line. I think we have learned a lot in this period in São Paulo. First of all, yes, as you said, we have the technology, we have the tools, we have the law, we have all the enough to accelerate the expansion of the sustainable urban mobility. And São Paulo has designed good projects to attract the private sector. 10 days ago, they finished a new bid process to hire the first intercity trains in São Paulo, connecting Campinas and São Paulo using private sector experience, capital, and efficiency. But at the same time that you learn how to design projects, we continue to learn, but we have good projects. We have learned that to do it, observing the user's interests and the public sector interest, the state needs to be prepared to regulate these contracts. We need to answer some questions before we start the project. Why we are concede this infrastructure, this line, this metro line or the train line? Because I don't have money to expand, to modernize, or it's so expensive to do by the public sector, or the private sector can bring its efficiency, its knowledge. But after this question, we need to answer another important question. As I state, I am prepared to regulate this contract. I have technical people to follow the contract and to guarantee that the public interest and the user interest will be observed for 20 years, 35 years. We have institutional design to do it, or we will have a lot of asymmetry, information asymmetry that the state will not be able to regulate it. So we have an important task in the public sector, that is to have a good agency, good institutional design, and especially good technicals to follow these contracts while 35 years. Sometimes I think that São Paulo has the obligation, since it signed the contract with the line for 2006, to create a public agency to follow the contracts. Unfortunately, by now, they didn't implement an independent agency to do it. And it causes a lot of issues, and the state is losing the capacity to be in the same position or with the private sector to regulate the contracts, observing the public interest and the user's interest. I think before to get engaged, the public sector, the private sector and the multilateral agencies, we need to be prepared. As government, we need to be prepared to follow and regulate these contracts. Thank you very much.
Excellent comments, Sergio. Rogelio Rivera, why don't we turn to you? We're talking about infrastructure. Mexico has a national public transport infrastructure program. It's called PROTRAM. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about Mexico's efforts to merge private and public finance to improve public transport and mass transportation in general in Mexico.
Yes. Good morning. Hi, everyone. We have a PROTAM. PROTAM is a program, as you mentioned, a big program supported by the FONADIN. FONADIN is our fund, Mexico fund, supported by roads income. So it's a big tool for the Mexican state to develop infrastructure in all the sectors, no, water, energy. So PROTAM is transforming all the policies, the climate policies, the transport policies around the Mexican state, especially in the cities, in metropolitan cities, who faced an climate challenge, no? So the next steps for the PROTAM is to transform not only non-recoverable incomes. So make sustainable with the proper tools and in facing to be not dependable of the federal incomes, no? So with the all demand and all sustainable resources. We have nowadays 43 projects. Maybe 35 are totally recoverable. Are totally recoverable, and it supports the policies. It's a joint of the policy government to face the climate change and the make a competitiveness, more economy competitiveness and sustainable, no? Maybe the next steps of PROTAM there are to continue to converge with the best policies, with the best practices in the World Bank and other multilateral organisms. The integration with the sustainable and green taxonomy of Mexico, and more and more with the PPPs diligence in Mexico law. So related with environmental, the legal, the technical issues. This is the landscape and the next steps for the PROTAM Mexico.
Excellent. Yeah. So we'll hopefully come back to some of these efforts in a bit. As long as we're in the Latin American region, let's turn to Felipe Esquerra and cover maybe the topic of electric buses. I know we've talked about some of the efforts that IDB Invest is doing, but perhaps you want to talk about this or some of the wider efforts of IDB Invest to bring in private capital.
Yeah, thank you very much, Benjamin. And first of all, thank you to you and the World Bank for having me in this event. Yes, we IDB Invest, we are the private sector arm of the Inter-American Development Bank, and we are, of course, providing financial solutions to private companies and investors developing infra projects in the region with a very clear focus in mobilization. That is one of our key objectives in any of our projects, trying to develop new ways of mobilizing capital. And to put an example of how we support, and I like the comment on the programmatic view, and then I like to use the example of the or the 4G PPP road program in Colombia that was started to be developed by the government in 2012 and is under implementation since 2014, looking to improve in that programmatic way the quality and capacity of the road transport network across the country, including 29 PPP contracts that is expected to mobilize more than $24 billion in construction and rehabilitation of roads. Of course, these investments are playing a critical role in supporting the long-term economic growth in the country, but also are playing a critical role in terms of sustainability of the road network, both in the social and environmental point of view, and significantly improving resiliency against climate change of the road network. The success of this program is the result of the ability of the Colombian government to enter in a transparent conversation with private sector, from construction companies, investors, and of course, financial institutions to develop an equilibrated risk-sharing framework for the program that has been able to attract investors, sponsors, and capital to develop the program. From IDB Invest, we have played an important role supporting this PPP program, having financed until now 6 out of 29 contracts. And of those, I would very quickly put example of one of the projects that is called Pamplona, Cúcuta, that are two small cities in the southern part of Colombia. This project integrates rural farmers across 7 municipalities close to the border with Ecuador, and where 96% of the population in the influence area of the road are indigenous population communities. In this specific project, IDB Invest participated in the project as anchor investor in the issuance of a local currency denominated 144A bond in the US market that was classified as social bond. This was the first social bond issued in Latin America to finance a road project, and through this structure, helping to mobilize capital to the region. And of course, we understand that this type of precedents is that we are looking in our job.
Great, and I think we'll come back in my next question on some of the specific examples from Bogota that we get to. So why don't we widen out to the bigger picture? Astrid Malmroth, you're leading the Global Infrastructure Facility. I think it would be great to hear specifically kind of on what you see as the big picture opportunities, or just your kind of comments on the topic of this session.
Thanks very much, Ben, for having me in this conversation. And building on Richard's rather inspiring opening, I would like to say we need 3 transformations. So we need to transform how we finance the SDGs and the global climate goals. And that is, of course, bringing in the private sector. We need then to transform how the MDBs mobilize private capital, because we need to be honest, we haven't yet made the billions to trillions agenda work properly. And within that, I would argue that we need to transform how we develop a bankable pipeline as a first step towards private capital mobilization. And that's exactly the sweet spot and the space where the Global Infrastructure Facility is working. We are a G20 initiative that was created 10 years ago to advise governments, provide transaction services to governments to prepare infrastructure projects and programs for private sector investment. And we are doing so as an open access platform, working through all the MDBs in a collaborative manner and in a structured collaboration with the private sector through a private sector advisory council, including international banks, investors, developers with over 18 trillion in assets under management. Climate is at the heart of what we do. 93% of our portfolio is actually climate smart. So we have supported the development of projects in renewable energy, energy efficiency, green hydrogen, low carbon transport, but also social infrastructure, water, waste management, etc. So the full range of infrastructure services. We are, as we're working in the multilateral system, fully committed to ensuring Paris alignment in everything we do. And that's actually a non-trivial exercise in the project preparation and advisory services, which we are currently doing with all of our partner MDBs to make sure that we find some form of common denominator and minimum standard in that context. And we are also actively developing knowledge products. So together with our partner organization, the Public-Private Infrastructure Advisory Facility, we have developed a toolkit how to integrate climate consideration in infrastructure project preparation. So one of the questions to me was, what does that toolkit entail? It's basically looking at the entire range from methodology, standards, and frameworks. Of course, integrating climate value for money considerations versus affordability considerations. That's important to evaluate optimal risk allocation and contractual predictability, of course, but also contract flexibility to accommodate uncertainty over the life of these long-term infrastructure projects. And then really translating climate decisions for mitigation and adaptation into project requirements and technical specifications. That's where the rubber hits the road on the project preparation side of things. And then fourthly, in the area of climate, we have at COP28 launched the Carbon Action Forum together with the World Bank's Climate Change Practice and the Partnership for Market Implementation, which really aims at helping to build the voluntary carbon markets by creating emission reduction credits from MDB operations. That is currently an underutilized space. And we're piloting this together with the World Bank, but then as an MDB platform, we can also do this together with our 10 other member MDBs, including IDB and hopefully soon IDB Invest as well. So how do we get to scale? That's really the big question on the table, right? So as Richard already said, we need to move from projects to programs. We have a number of experiences how we can actually develop programmatic approaches to infrastructure finance. Our lighthouse case study here is Brazil again, but actually a municipal program in the energy efficient street lighting space, but very similar to what Sao Paulo did on the metro and the urban rail actually. And I think Brazil is honestly a leader in the space. There's a lot that we can learn from Brazil's experience, but we can also then help package that knowledge and make it available to other countries and partners. Panama Transport is another program that we developed together with the IFC as a programmatic approach to the transport, the road sector, and the first close has recently been achieved in that context. But we also help structure and develop blended finance solutions. So for example, in Indonesia, we developed a national geothermal facility. And I think this is one of the areas where we can also all collaborate in terms of national project preparation platforms and national blended finance solutions. It's also a way to de-risk the space, right? Because if governments have a stake, they are incentivized to make sure that the regulation is in place to really make these PPPs a success. And as I mentioned already, voluntary carbon markets are certainly part of the solution. So we are seeing a lot of momentum and a lot of demand. As was mentioned on Monday, part of the soft skills in bringing this all to scale, of course, is also the improved collaboration and reducing the fragmentation in the ecosystem, both at regional, global, and at country level. And in that context, it's great that we're all speaking today. Thank you.
Great. We like those comments coming on the big picture and what's happening and some of the outcomes that were coming from the last COP. Kader Hassan, why don't we turn to you and hear about some of Africa 50s efforts. And I think particularly we wanted to hear from you how you're building resilience into the financing of projects.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you for having me. So to build resilience, you have to build the infrastructure, and that's where we're struggling a bit. As my colleague to the right said, if I bring this to the African continent, it's taking a lot more time and a lot longer for infrastructure to get across. On average, the project that we close, we've been working on for 7-8 years. But then you have to ask yourself, what's the issue? Because you typically go where the market is, and the market is there. Because when you look at the data, Africans pay more because of the lack of transport. We said it this morning, 50% of the cost of food is because of inadequate transport. 30% of food is wasted because of inadequate transport. Now, what you do is you want to mobilize the largest sources of funding for the infrastructure. And where is that money? It's not DFIs, it's not government, it's private sector. We just heard the example of BlackRock and the GIP acquisition. They sit on billions. If you're going to make the transition from billion to trillions, you have to go where the money is. But why isn't the private sector coming in and investing in that? Well, the answer is simple. Well, the market is there, but the returns are not there. Or the risk-adjusted return is not there. It's a proper way of saying it. So if we want to attract them, then we need to work on this. It's as if you want to build a house, you have to work on the foundations. And other entities are better placed to work on the risk management, the ecosystem, building these foundations so we can get private sector to come in and invest in infrastructure. You talked about resilience. The reality is when we look at the projects that we do, we obviously need to make them as resilient as possible if we're going to hope to have our returns, because the infrastructure has to be sustainable. But that has a cost. You're already operating in an environment where the infrastructure is more expensive, and then you're asking to make it even more expensive so you can have it more resilient. Somebody else has to cater to that additional cost, and that's not the private sector. We've had conversation with Daniel about his facility, and I think that's what it does. Unless you get some form of blended finance across the table, or you get some other entities, quasi-governmental, MDB, that can take care of some of those risks, and we can get into them in the detail that the private sector is not able to take, then we're not going to get to a place where we're going to get the billions flowing in. And without that, we can't make headways.
Yeah, this is the crux of the issue. How do you get the private finance flowing? And that is the $1 trillion question, right? So, Rogelio, why don't we turn back to you again? There is to some extent that moving from projects to programs, Mexico has some of these in place, as with ProTram. But maybe you wanted to talk specifically about how some of this program is accessing private funding in the country.
Yeah, as you know, ProTram is initially financed by the Banobras. Banco is a national development bank of Mexico to relate it with works and with the objective to enhance and special efforts of the subnational governments, Mexico. So in the firstly, ProTram is financed by Banobras or Development Bank, but with the pass of the time, it's attractive for the private banks, for multiple banks. So nowadays, the subnational governments is recurring to the private banks. So in special products guaranteed by the World Bank, by the corporate national bank, is more participating the private sector through private banks. Is attractive. We have this kind of products in Mexico, and obviously supported by all the National Development Bank and other banks, and for external commerce bank, Bancomext, for national financiera, all branch of the other banks of development is supporting this effort of ProTram.
Excellent. Sergio, I know we've heard about Metro in Sao Paulo. There's also some cultivation of electric bus fleets. Sao Paulo, I don't know, is it the biggest bus fleet in all of Latin America, South America at least? Can you talk about what's sort of brewing there?
Thank you, Ben. Yes, there is in the room Mr. Arellano and Mr. Miranda, who are the secretaries of the São Paulo City Hall. They are responsible for managing this program. And yesterday, we had the opportunity to hear Mr. Arellano explaining a little bit about the efforts that they are doing to replace the diesel fleet, 11,500 buses for e-buses. I served as secretary in this city in 2017 and 2018. In this opportunity, man, we approved a law that this law obligates the city to remove 50% of the fleet, the diesel fleet, by 2027 and 100% by 2037. So they have a huge challenge to do it. You know, the barriers to replace diesel buses for green and sustainable buses. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the plan was very simple. They have 32 contractors who are operating the system, the bus system. It's a private operators, but it's in general, they are small, not small, but they are companies that they don't have access. They don't have good rates to access credits. Some companies, actually, they don't have access to credits. And if they have, they will pay a lot for this money. And São Paulo City, thanks Mr. Arellano, who are doing a great job, they have a very high rate credit classification. And they are designing a very, very, I think, very good program to finance this replacement. The city has taken financial from the multilateral banks, from World Bank, thanks World Bank, from IDB, thank you, IDB, and the federal government as well. And they are using its capacity to take money cheaper than the private operators. And they are obligating the operators to buy e-buses. It's a private selection. The city is not saying buy from X or Z manufacturer. It's up to the operator, and it's good to allocate liability and responsibilities about maintenance, about the choosing of the fleet. But they are transferred this money as subsidized, because the city, actually the city subsidizing around, Mr. Arellano can correct me, around 50% of the cost of the system now is paying by the city, not by the users. And they are subsidizing the price difference between diesel buses, the part of the price that corresponds to the price of the diesel buses, the bus operator is paying. It's in the contract, it's obligation, their obligation. But the difference, the city is transferring this money as subsidizing the private sector. And I think this design is more effective to reduce the costs, to engage the private operators, but you know, there are some resistance to replace diesel buses for electric buses. And in a few years, the city will obtain expressive reduction of cost of the system. You know that to operate electric buses is cheaper than diesel buses, and they will complain the target to replace the fleet as the law obligates. I think it's a very good example to engage the private sector, the public sector, and multilateral agencies to solve a big issue that is the cost of the money to invest in a more expensive assets.
Great. Yes, please go ahead.
Very interesting. I have a comment on this, and I think it's very funny because it's true that the electric buses are more expensive, but I have to give a story here, which I thought was interesting. There's a finance minister from an African country who said to me, literally, and we all agree that electric transition is important and all that. He said to me, "Kader, you're getting on my nerves." He literally said that. He said, "You're reducing my revenues and you're increasing my cost." And it was mentioned briefly yesterday, but what we have to realize is that for a lot speaking of the African jurisdiction, fuel taxes represent a lot of revenues for ministries of finance. You're removing them, which means you're reducing his revenues. Then something we're not talked about enough is that when you're electrifying the motorcycles, they tend to be people at the lower end of the social class. They live on the outskirts. And at night, they're charging it, which means that he was giving me the example of how the Ministry of Energy is coming to him and saying that all of the substation and the transformers on the outside of town have to be changed, have to be powered up. It's not part of their plan for the next 5 years because now there's a lot of electricity demand at the outskirts of the city. So here we're coming, we sit in great meetings, we say, this is great for the environment, we're gonna do this, we're gonna change this. He needs to find money to subsidize the cost of electric buses that are more expensive. The revenues from the fuel subsidies he's getting is lower. And his Ministry of Energy is coming to him and saying, I need more money because I need to invest in this because people are upset. So I'm just saying that this is just an example to say that we need a full picture and take the time to look at the situation these countries are in. And one final thing is another country I went to when we're talking about transition is thinking that the national, my coverage in terms of generation is less than 38%. Why am I going to charge these? I'm just saying that there's a lot of precedents saying that we should not lose track of.
Yeah, I mean, in transport, we seek to tax the negative externalities, right? And so that and use that revenue for sustainable transport, ideally. But in this case, we're seeing reduction in revenue because of those negative externalities being reduced. So I think this is an excellent point for us to take away from this. Felipe, speaking of the outskirts of cities, I know IDB Invest has helped finance electric buses in Bogota as well as Santiago. In Bogota, I think this is one area was Rolita and the outside of the more on the outside of the city. But maybe you want to comment about how you've been able to bring in the private finance for those. I think these two cities have the largest bus fleets in the Americas as of now, soon to be overtaken by Sao Paulo.
Thank you, Ben. And very interesting comments. We in IDB Invest are trying to support. First, we as IDB Group, the IDB and IDB Invest, have as one of our institutional priorities the deployment of electromobility in the region. And that means that in that context, IDB is working with governments across the region in the upstream work, trying first to at least discuss some of these impacts and then helping them to develop national strategies and developing feasibility studies and at the end trying to help to work in this area of different subsidies that are linked to fossil fuels and how to manage this new environment. From the private side, in IDB Invest, we are focused in supporting private companies and private investors in the deployment of electric buses across the region. And electric buses in operation in the region has grown a lot and quickly, from around 120 buses in 2018 to around 4,000 buses in operation in the region by the end of 2023. And currently, 11 countries in the region have electric buses in operation. And the two leading cities up to now in this process are Bogota in Colombia and Santiago in Chile, that account currently for a total fleet of around 3,500 buses, electric buses being 86% of the total fleet in the region and being the two largest fleets globally outside China. And how this process have been possible. These two cities worked in the development of a new PPP framework for the public bus operators. And this new Traditionally, the concession contracts to provide the bus public transport service included the acquisition of the buses and the operation during a period of, something around 8 years. And the new model that has done is split the service in 2 different contracts, with one contract to provide the fleet to the public transit authority, and the second contract to operate the buses. These new contractual frameworks try to address some of the barriers to accelerate the deployment of electric buses, creating bankable structures and facilitating the attraction of new capital to the process, both for the equity and the debt. First, the higher upfront cost of electric buses compared with conventional ones need longer terms for the contracts to facilitate the amortization of the fleet. And the terms of this new contract is between 12 and 14 years. Second, the contracts to provide the fleet are based in availability payments by the public transport authorities and do not take demand risks. And also this new model has permitted entering in the market of public transport new actors with good credit ratings instead of the, in general, low credit ratings of the traditional operators of the system. This new system, also from the operational side, these models also create more flexibility for public regulators in case of operators not performing well, because they have the ability to manage the change of the operator, but maintaining the fleet available for the service. And we from IDB Invest are actively supporting these new PPP models, and we have financed up to now 3 of these PPPs awarded in Colombia, in Bogota, and in Santiago, providing local currency solution. This is important, local currency solution to the public authorities. And we have, through these PPPs, deployed around 1,400 electric buses. That means around 35% of the total fleet in Latin America up to now.
Great. So look to these models. If we're looking to go from projects to programs, let's look at these models for doing that. And Astrid, maybe we get back to this comment you made, going from projects to what can we all do here? What should we take away from what are the key things that need to be unlocked for us to move from these projects to programs? And feel free to reflect on from beyond transports to broader infrastructure that might have lessons for transport.
Sure, maybe 3 quick points. It really, for me, starts with collaboration, right, across the entire upstream, midstream, downstream life cycle of infrastructure. In the enabling environment work, many actors are engaged in trying to do the right thing, but governments also receive a lot of advice, and it's not always coordinated. So I think there's benefit in really streamlining. On the midstream side of things, I would say the project preparation transaction advisory space is underfunded, and for some reason goes a little bit unnoticed in the PCM agenda. Everybody's immediately jumping to the announcements of billions of downstream financing facilities, but they won't happen, and the pipeline will not be there unless we scale up and we transform pipeline development. So there is really a need, I think, for all of us to collaborate there and build the capacity of governments to negotiate these complex projects. We talk a lot to private sector developers and investors, and if we ask them what can we do to help you develop more projects and programs faster, they never say help me bite down my development costs, but they always say please equip the other side of the table, i.e. our government counterparts, to do this faster and with more capacity that they don't always have. So I think that's a very important point. And then on the downstream finance, of course, I think blended finance has a lot of promise, as was mentioned, but we also need to get to there's fragmentation to enable scale on blended finance. I mean, if you look at the most recent OECD survey of blended finance funds and facilities, I think we're having close to 200 facilities with an average size of about $200 million. institutional investors like BlackRock, they will not look at anything unless they can, invest a ticket of at least 50 to 100 million. These facilities are too small. So yes, it's great that BlackRock is moving into the space, and it's also great that BlackRock is, for example, investing into Lake Turkana, etc. But we need to create more standardized vehicles that brings in private capital at scale.
Kader, do you want to comment on?
Frankly, couldn't agree more. That she hit it on the nail. She's not much to add, because it's my point. It's been my point this entire week, is that we need 2 points, and this is what we do at Africa PT. The first one, project development is crucial. If you don't have a pipeline, there's no point, and you have to have patient capital in order to invest in project development, because the attrition rate is high, it's very risky, and it takes a lot of time. And so without patient capital, you can't invest in project development. And then at the tail end, you need to structure it in such a way that you can get these investors to come in. And they will not come in with a $20 million ticket. It's not worth them getting out of bed for this. So you have to structure it a bit differently. I couldn't agree more.
Great. And so we have probably hungry people here that want to go to lunch, but Richard, I think we kind of come full circle. Maybe you want to give a brief 1-minute remark before I conclude here on this.
Thank you. Well, very briefly, firstly, what a wonderful set of examples we've had, and I think that's the inspiration that we need, and the examples of where this has actually been done, whether it's in Bogota or in Sao Paulo or so on. But the really critical point for me, and this goes to a number of the comments that you've made, Kader, is it's about marketplace. And Paul Boddenham made the point really strongly from the Bezos Earth Fund yesterday. Your lovely example about the challenge of moving to electric vehicles and the double whammy it has to governments. We need to recognise that we need to tear up existing commercial, in this case, and public finance models, and put in place new models which are for the world that we are heading into, and we need to do it very urgently. In that particular example, we have to embrace road pricing, because that is the way that you get out of that, and there's no other way out of it.
Excellent point to end on. I just wanted to shamelessly plug some WRI work. We are undergoing some research with the High Volume Transport Program of UK's FCDO on bringing climate finance, more private funding into climate finance. We've reviewed some 800 plus projects from around the world and looking at about 16 case studies of these. This is forthcoming research, so I just wanted to alert people to this. Should be coming out in a couple months. So just keep your eyes peeled, and we look forward to more conversation with the World Bank, with those here at the table, and all of you in this room. I wish you a good lunch. Thank you for attending.